I just wanted to welcome you all to the 2019 Work First Fellowship Research Symposium. We're so incredibly glad to have all of you here today to celebrate the research our wonderful fellows conducted this year. The Work First Fellowship is a direct service program that provides young professionals with the opportunity to directly impact urban poverty. Each fellow here today has spent the past year working directly with individuals living below the poverty level to find employment and get back on their feet, while simultaneously conducting research on public policy issues around employment and workforce development. As you will hear when they present their findings, the experience of working one-on-one with clients provides these fellows with unique perspectives and expertise. They have spent a year analyzing the public policy that directly affects the people they serve, and now they have the chance to say something about it. Today we'll hear topics around transportation, veteran vocational programs, employer hiring perspectives, saving habits, and educational programs, and a host of many others. You'll hear all of them. So, as trite as it sounds, it really does just seem yesterday that these fellows walked into the first day of orientation. For all. We are incredibly proud of the work that each and every one of you has put into your fellowship year. Now, before we delve into the amazing research projects our fellows have put together, for the second year in a row, we asked our fellows to tell us about their future plans in the form of a 6-word story. Thank you to Joel Thomas. Where are you, Joel? All right, yeah, for your inspiration behind this project, and Velvet Vaughn for compiling their stories into this lovely video. We hope that by showing you a little bit more about them and their future plans, this will allow you to see the other side of our fellows that we get to see on a daily basis and might give you a little more context for their research projects. Our first presenter today will be Courtney Thomas from Memphis, Tennessee.
All right, everyone. I'm going to be talking about today transportation barriers in Memphis TANF recipients. So to give some background, Memphis is a fairly large city, but it has a thinly spread population. So to give you an idea, it's about the same size of New York City in terms of land mass, but it has fewer than 1 million people. As a result of this discrepancy, there's a high degree of job sprawl throughout the city. So jobs are located various parts throughout the city and not within miles of the city center. It's also known that Memphis has a largely inefficient public transit system. For the typical Memphis commuter, only 26% of jobs are actually reachable by transit in less than 90 minutes, and only 5% are reachable in less than 45 minutes. So why does this matter? Well, for TANF recipients, individuals who are receiving temporary assistance for needy families, a government-funded program, they are required to complete work activity for 30 hours a week. So my research focuses on 3 questions. What barrier, if any, does transportation present for America Works of Tennessee TANF clients? Do these barriers affect America Works clients' abilities to find jobs and retain them? And how can America Works and the state of Tennessee improve transportation services to better support the TANF population? So I had 2 main hypotheses for my research. I suspected that TANF clients are unable to comply with their 30-hour work activity because of a lack of reliable transportation. I also suspected that non-compliant clients would live further away from America Works and partner organizations, while compliant clients who are completing their work requirements, would live closer to potential job opportunities. So the method that I used was largely quantitative. I surveyed 80 America Works of Tennessee TANF clients in Memphis. I looked at the demographics, the transportation use, and their accessibility to jobs. I also partnered with the Mid-South Peace and Justice Center, which is an advocacy organization in Memphis doing work on transit justice to help create a GIS map, which would track the proximity that clients lived related to where they were located for their jobs. I also did a cross-tabulation analysis and chi-square test to see if there was any statistical significance between the variables. So, here are the results. I found that the two main transportation barriers were a lack of driver's licenses and a lack of auto insurance in the TANF population. 40% of participants did not have valid driver's licenses, and 60% of participants had no auto insurance. I was also surprised to learn that most of the Memphis TANF clients actually drove their own vehicle to and from their work activities, and only 27% of participants actually relied on public transit. Now, when it came to looking at employment accessibility and retention, I found that clients who had driver's licenses were more willing to take advantage of job opportunities further in distance, and clients who had access to a vehicle were less likely to arrive late to their jobs. So here are the maps. There's two maps, the compliant clients and the non-compliant clients. So the first map of the compliant clients actually shows that compliant clients lived further away from the office. And the area in blue is what represents Memphis. And as you can see, the clients are further away. But the non-compliant clients actually live within Memphis, closer to potential job opportunities. A rather strange finding. So in conclusion, I found out that transportation barriers do not determine whether or not a client is actually compliant with their TANF case. But in an auto-centric city like Memphis, access to an operable vehicle is fundamental in finding and maintaining employment. So I have 3 recommendations. The first is we need to expand state funding to improve private transportation services and address private transportation barriers. TANF clients are already using their private vehicles to get to their work activities, and they need more access to services. Second, I would encourage AmericaWorks to partner with rideshare agencies and car share programs to give TANF clients cars and reliable rides. In cities like Milwaukee, Houston, Atlanta, Lyft and Uber have partnered with large nonprofits to help get clients to work. In West Virginia, the TANF population actually is able to rent vehicles to get to their work activity. There's tons of already innovative strategies that are working and having successful outcomes. Finally, I would suggest that AmericaWorks partners with state and car insurance agencies to develop a low-income car insurance program. Low-income individuals are actually charged a much higher rate for car insurance than moderate and high-income families. So getting low-income clients car insurance are going to allow them to actually legally operate their vehicles on the road and access the private transportation services designed to help them. Thank you. And now you are going to hear from my colleague, Ben Harker, who's going to talk a little bit about public transit in Staten Island.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Ben Harker, and I was the Staten Island Fellow, which influenced the topic of my research greatly. So I just want to start off briefly with some quick background. And when it comes to transportation in New York, we naturally need to begin with everyone's favorite organization, the MTA. So, New York City hosts the world's largest transportation network, with the MTA having nearly 500 subway stations across all 5 boroughs. However, Staten Island is home to only 20 light rail stations, which has resulted in 40% of Staten Islanders commuting via public transportation. Those who commute via public transportation, 40% of them spend 2 hours on their round trip to and from work. Also, it's important to know that lower income New Yorkers rely on public transportation at much higher levels than moderate and higher income New Yorkers. And finally, transportation costs account for over 10% of household income for working lower income New York residents. This information led me to formulate 3 research questions. My first what is the relationship between access to quality public transportation and job selection/retention? Secondly, how can revisiting transportation benefits help to improve access to more jobs for those of us, or for those living on public assistance? And third, how can the city work to provide greater access to efficient transportation for those living in more far out decentralized locations? In terms of methodology, I initially hypothesized that limited access to quality public transit services was deterring individuals from jobs that they may otherwise consider, and also that distributing transportation benefits differently based on individual need could create additional opportunities for those living on public assistance, as well as other low-income individuals. So I constructed a survey that was distributed primarily in Staten Island, Far Rockaway, and the Bronx. We received 104 responses, and the survey included 3 sections, one for demographics, another for transportation, and finally one that combined transportation with their employment experience. So some of the initial results that I found, first, participants rely heavily on public transportation. New Yorkers, simply, we don't drive much, and this is true for those on public assistance as well. Only 32% had a driver's license and 10% owned a vehicle. 28% of Staten Islanders, however, live farther than a 30-minute walk from the nearest train station, compared to just 4.3% in Far Rockaway and 5.6% in the Bronx. 71% of Staten Islanders who had taken an express bus, which is an alternative form of public transportation that you can pay for a little bit more for than local options. 71% of Staten Islanders reported a timely and efficient experience with express buses, which was higher than any other site. However, only 24% believed that express buses were accessible, related to either cost-related or station location-related reasons. Finally, 41.4% of all participants reported personal safety as being a reason for wanting an efficient commute to work, compared to about 36% reporting childcare and about 25% reporting desire to maximize personal time at home. Another question I asked clients if a long or stressful commute had ever led them to either leave a job, not apply for a job, or miss an interview or appointment. And what we see is that the numbers are pretty high for all 3 of these questions. Over 60% of participants in Far Rockaway and the Bronx reported not applying for a job due to the commute, and that figure was 80% in Staten Island. So 4 of every 5 participants had reported not applying to a job simply because of the commute. In conclusion, access to transportation has a direct impact on participants' ability to keep a job, as well as their willingness to apply for jobs outside of the community. Participants believe that they would have greater access to employment if benefits were expanded. And finally, participants tended to have positive experiences on express buses, but currently don't feel that they are an accessible option. Therefore, I have a few recommendations. First, I think that a pilot project should be implemented that temporarily provides express bus passes to eligible clients. I think it would be a great way to discover whether or not having access to a more efficient means of transportation might encourage them to apply for a broader variety of positions. Secondly, we should expand the scope of successful existing initiatives such as restructuring express bus routes and establishing more select bus service options along local routes. The select buses have been proven to improve commute times in all of the routes that they've currently been implemented. And finally, we should develop new transportation options that reach highly decentralized locations like Staten Island's North Shore, for example, which has had abandoned railway tracks for decades. And the MTA actually sponsored a study that indicated about 20,000 people would have an improved commute if a bus rapid transit route were installed along that current route. I now have the pleasure of introducing Matt Proper, who will be talking a little bit about comparing veterans' employment programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. As Ben mentioned, I'm going to discuss a veterans issue. I've been working with homeless veterans this past year at America Works, so I decided to do my research on an issue that affects their lives. After speaking with 2 of my team members, both of whom are Marines, I decided to compare 2 different employment programs that help veterans. One, compensated work therapy, or CWT, is a months-long intensive training and vocational rehabilitation program that offers veterans a stipend for working at a VA hospital or other affiliated institution. The other program, the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, or HVRP, tries to get veterans employment as quickly as possible using the rapid attachment model. And that's the program that I worked at this past year with America Works. So in order to compare the two programs, I split veterans into two groups that I surveyed. All the veterans were enrolled in HVRP. However, half of the veterans were also engaged with CWT. That group, for my research, is called CWT veterans. The other group is called non-CWT veterans. So I developed 3 research questions. 1, did non-CWT veterans find jobs quicker than CWT veterans? 2, did CWT veterans have higher wages than non-CWT veterans? And 3, did CWT veterans stay at their positions longer? Based on those questions, I developed 2 hypotheses. 1, non-CWT veterans will find a job quicker than CWT veterans based on the rapid attachment model. And 2, CWT veterans will have higher wages and stay at their positions longer because of their extended training and vocational rehabilitation. I surveyed 59 veterans total, both on paper and using Google Forms. Now, the next 4 slides, I'll show you bar graphs that compare CWT and non-CWT veteran data side by side so you get a visual. This graph shows you that it took non-CWT veterans, or HVRP veterans, less time to find a position than CWT veterans. Here, you'll see that non-CWT veterans were generally paid higher wages than CWT veterans. About 26% were paid $22 or more compared to 0 CWT veterans. Here you'll see that non-CWT veterans held their positions much longer than CWT veterans. Almost 70% held their positions 6 months or longer. Here, you'll see that after beginning work, over 50% of non-CWT veterans and over 37% of CWT veterans searched for a new job. So overall, what we saw from our data was that the HVRP veterans, the non-CWT veterans, found jobs quicker, were paid higher wages, and stayed at their jobs longer. However, over 50% of them also searched for a new job soon after beginning work. So to me, that represented an opportunity for both HVRP and CWT. I think that they should enhance services that help veterans transition from one job to the next. A lot of veterans find their first job to get back on their feet, to stabilize housing, but they want another job that's more in line with their longer-term career goals. In addition, I think that HVRP and CWT should collaborate so that if veterans are involved in both programs, staff from each program can talk and generate ideas to most effectively serve our veteran population. Thank you. And now I will introduce Anj, our Baltimore Fellow, who's going to discuss the criminalization of poverty.
Thanks, Matt. Like he said, my name is Anjali, and I work in the Baltimore City office. And what I looked at over the past year was specifically in relation to our reentry population. So we have 2 programs, one for participants who've been incarcerated for at least a year at any point in their lives, the reentry program, and the pretrial program, so individuals who are on pretrial supervision. So the guiding questions that led my research were as follows. Firstly, what are the barriers that individuals face when they are released, either from a correctional facility, regardless of their defendant status? And I looked specifically at their belongings, so their phones as well as their wallets, specifically their IDs and social security cards. And then I tried to understand what are the mechanisms by which those barriers are perpetuated. Secondly, what are the financial and social repercussions of this issue, both for the individual and their family, but also economically as a society? And lastly, what institutional, organizational, and systemic policies and practices can be implemented in order to more smoothly and equitably facilitate this process of reobtaining one's belongings after being released. So I looked at, this is kind of uncharted territory in the literature so far, so I took a very exploratory and ethnographic approach with our participants, and I mostly did qualitative, semi-structured intake interviews where I asked participants who were coming in our door, their first visit at America Works, if they had their ID, if they didn't, why not, was it ever taken from them, by which means, so on and so forth. And I looked at two specific programs, the Baltimore Ex-Offender Reentry Employment Program, which is the one where participants have been incarcerated for at least a year, and the pretrial participants who are referred to us from the Baltimore City District Court judges, who send them to us for pretrial supervision in the hopes of finding employment prior to their trial, again, in the hopes that their sentences will be reduced or their charges will be dropped or they'll receive a stet or something like that, which is typically considered a favorable outcome and a less harsh sentence than what they originally might have gotten. So from my interviews, I found a couple of things. So in trying to understand the mechanisms by which the IDs were taken away from people, one of the things that I heard a lot from participants was that their IDs or their cell phones or their wallets that contained their IDs and their socials were seized for evidence, is what they were told. And so law enforcement would take their IDs, tell them that it was going to be used to indict someone or kind of find out who was criminally responsible for something, even if there wasn't really reasonable evidence that that would be used as evidence, so to speak. They were also not given very clear information on where they could reobtain their belongings. So you can imagine you've just been released and you're already disenfranchised in multiple ways, and now you don't have your ID to go about, let's say, getting housing, even though you're already disenfranchised if you have a criminal record, so on and so forth. And not least of which is employment, of course. There's also an unclear time limit for picking up belongings, and a lot of times people run into bureaucratic red tape in law enforcement. So they might go to one place, they're told that a police officer doesn't work there anymore, they have to go somewhere else. And I actually also found through this process that through loopholes in civil and criminal forfeiture laws, the government can actually profit off of these belongings that they can auction off and make a profit at the end of the fiscal year. So it's literally profiting off of people's belongings that are never returned to them, who again are already multiply marginalized within the criminal justice system, racially and so on. So the connection to employment was what I focused on. And what I found was that people who are coming out of either prison or are released on pretrial supervision don't have their IDs, and when they come to us, there's a very long process through which they have to go to reobtain their IDs, and the biggest thing for them is that it costs money. So in Baltimore City, a one-way bus ride is $1.80, and then you got to get back home as well, or to your work program, and the resources in Baltimore City are quite limited. The ID at the MVA costs $24 as well, and so folks don't even have the $180 to get one way, much less the rest of the money. And so they don't have their ID and they can't get a job because jobs require valid form of state ID. Your prison ID will not do. Not only that, but it sends a red flag to employers that already tells them you have a criminal background. So they're unable to get jobs, but they can't get IDs because they don't have money through a job. So it's a catch-22 and they just keep going through this cycle. So of course, my research does focus specifically on Baltimore City. So more research is most certainly needed in both Baltimore City as a larger study and also across the country. But all in all, I'm proposing that local and federal level policies are needed, which I'll get to in a second, but overall to address the bureaucracy and lack of accountability across the board within law enforcement. Apart from anyone who has a stake in private prisons or the industry at large, all communities and individuals, and like I said earlier, the economy as a whole benefit from lower unemployment and better pretrial and reentry outcomes for individuals. So my 3 recommendations are as follows. Number 1, immediacy is very important. So as soon as someone is released from a correctional facility, it's very important that and there are some pilot programs across the country that already do this, but to have centralized locations immediately centered right outside of correctional facilities so that people can immediately have access to housing, expungement, public defenders, health resources as well, just runs the gamut in terms of what people's needs are when they're being released, especially because they may not have money once they are released to get to those resources. Very helpful when they have that right immediately, and some of our participants said that when there were programs that offered that to them immediately, it was very helpful for them. Secondly, funding. So more specifically, there are resources in Baltimore City that we sometimes send our participants to, but a number of times we basically run into a wall because these programs no longer have any vouchers or any funding to provide to participants to get their new IDs. And so people end up waiting for a very long time, which then prolongs the employment process as well. And then people tend to get discouraged and lose momentum in the job search process altogether, which then can also increase recidivism. And lastly, legal action for those who have been particularly disenfranchised by law enforcement, who have been either, if their houses have been raided and they've been their belongings have been taken away and never returned to them, and information hasn't been provided, as some of our participants actually did disclose to us. So legal action, both on the individual level and then on a larger level, is also another possibility. Thank you so much. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Anne, my colleague from Milwaukee, and she's going to be talking about drug-related criminal background and its relation to employment.
Thank you, Anjali. Hi, everyone. My name is Anne Mahoney, and I was conducting my research in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with America Works of Wisconsin. And I did my research on drug-related criminal backgrounds and its effect on employment. So last year's fellow Laurel used America Works partnership with the Brattleboro Retreat in Vermont to conduct her research on vocational services and substance abuse treatment. There has been a ton of research done on the positive correlation between vocational services and employment. So now begs the question, how do we actually get individuals receiving these drug rehabilitation treatments who may have drug-related convictions into their job placements? To provide a little bit of background on why individuals in drug treatment programs like in the Brattleboro Retreat may face barriers to employment, a big one is going to be conviction-based employment discrimination. In a survey conducted by the Society of Human Resource Management, about 92% of responding employers state that they require a criminal background check at some point in their interviewing process. And having a criminal background may be a red flag to some employers because in another study done in 2017, it was found that 58% of individuals in prison met the criteria for substance abuse. So in an effort to dismantle the stigma around hiring ex-offenders, many states have adopted what's called the Ban the Box legislation. And if for those of you who don't know what Ban the Box is, it's an American campaign created by advocates for ex-offenders aimed at removing the checkbox that asks applicants if they have a criminal record on their application, giving these individuals a fair chance at employment. So this led me to my two research questions. First, are employers apprehensive about hiring people with previous drug charges and currently receiving drug rehabilitation treatment? And second, are employers more likely to hire applicants if they are honest about their past and present drug charges and treatment in the interviewing process? I hypothesize employers are likely to be apprehensive about hiring people in drug rehabilitation treatment. And secondly, I hypothesize that employers will be more likely to work with these applicants if they are honest about their past and present drug treatment and charges in the interviewing process. To test these hypotheses, surveys were emailed to America Works of Wisconsin partner employers to gather qualitative and quantitative data. A total of 20 anonymous surveys were received within 6 different industry sectors over the course of 1 month. So employers were asked what attributes they valued the most in their employees, and among the top mentioned was integrity, reliability, attendance, and dedication. It was found that 70% of respondents stated that they would be willing to provide some kind of accommodation to those receiving drug rehabilitation treatment, whether that be shift preference to accommodate treatment hours or some kind of transportation benefit through an employee assistance program. Another finding was that 50% of employers were unsure if they had any employees that were currently receiving drug rehabilitation. However, 75% of employers stated that they prefer applicants to be upfront about their history with substance abuse. So in conclusion, a majority of employers in this study were not apprehensive about hiring those in drug rehabilitation treatment regardless of criminal background, and in fact, most of them would be willing to make accommodations for them. Additionally, employers value integrity, and they would be more likely to work with these applicants if they're honest about their history with substance abuse during the interviewing process. I have a few recommendations moving forward to improve the services for our clients. As mentioned by both Courtney and Ben, and in my own research, improving the ease of use for transportation would improve clients' attendance, and this is really important, being that reliability and attendance were among the 2 most valued attributes by employers. Second would be to offer interviewing expertise specifically geared towards discussing those tough topics like one's history with substance abuse, because there is a professional and effective way to go about this conversation. A lot of the times, some of the clients just don't know it. And lastly, I would recommend career counseling in those industry sectors most willing to provide the accommodations for individuals in drug rehabilitation treatment. Thank you. Up next, we have Sarah Angel from Manhattan to discuss the asset limits in New York.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. And as Anne mentioned, I'll be talking about the asset limit. And in my work in Manhattan, I have taught the financial literacy class for a year now. And in talking to my clients, I heard a lot of them say that they did not want to open a bank account because they thought that their case would be affected, or they knew there was some limit on the amount of money they could put in the bank and still get the same benefits. And so I wondered how this actually worked in policy. And the asset limit is the limit on savings and investments for those receiving public assistance. So it's one of the two tests, there's income and assets, that determines eligibility. And the asset limit in New York for TANF right now is $2,000. And New York has actually removed the asset limit for SNAP. Reports that I read, including a 2014 Center for American Progress brief, have shown that asset limits can serve as a deterrent for saving money for people on public assistance. And in addition, according to previous studies by the FDIC and the Urban Institute, only 58% of Americans and even fewer residents of the Bronx and Manhattan have adequate emergency savings. And that's savings that somebody can use. Are recipients of public assistance able to start saving to create an emergency fund, even with these asset limits in place? Second, do recipients perceive the limits to be so strict that they choose not to save, or not to save in financial institutions such as banks? And three, how does gender affect emergency savings and the use of the banking system among our clients? My hypotheses were first, that the existence of the asset limit, and combined with general confusion about what that limit actually is, serves as a barrier to saving money for recipients of public assistance. I also suspected that the higher someone's guess of the asset limit was, the more money they would have saved, because they think they can save more and not affect their case, and so they would actually do that. And I also hypothesized that women would save less money than men, or have access to fewer savings than men, which I had found in previous studies I read. So I distributed an anonymous survey to 102 respondents at the America Works of New York Manhattan Career Advanced Program, and I distributed my survey from February to May of 2019. First results were that 71% of respondents did not have access to emergency savings. So I asked them, could you get $500, which is a commonly used number for emergency savings, if an unplanned expense came up? 71% said no. In addition, 17% of respondents reported not opening a bank account at some point for fear of getting their benefits cut off. And so that's not a majority, but a significant number of respondents said that they had not opened a bank account for that reason. This is a graph of everybody's guesses of the asset limit. So the way I phrased my question was, how much money do you think you're allowed to put in the bank and still have the same benefits you currently receive? So it's a little bit of a proxy for the asset limit, because the asset limit takes into account investments as well, but a lot of our clients don't have investments. So I use 2,000 as the number here. So the orange line is the asset limit, $2,000, and all the blue dots are everybody's guesses. So you can see a lot of the guesses were underneath 2,000. People thought they could save less than $2,000. Some people thought $0. Some people thought $10. A couple people thought $100,000, which is interesting. Thought they could have $100,000 and still get public assistance. Interesting to note. Threw off the scale of my graph a little bit too. But I also looked at the relationship between these two variables, guess of the asset limit and amount of money saved. So I didn't find a statistically significant relationship between the two. So I can't find a predictive relationship there, but there was a positive correlation. So that means that higher guesses were correlated with more savings. So if somebody had a higher guess of the asset limit, they tended to have more savings. In addition, I did find a statistically significant finding when it came to gender. So I ran a bunch of different tests, and I found that men are more likely to have access to emergency funds than women. A significant p-value was 0.014. More research needs to be done to figure out why this disparity exists and why men tend to have access to this $500 more often, but I did find that relationship. In conclusion, respondents were generally confused about how much money they could put in the bank while on benefits, as you could see from the graph.
In addition, some clients do refrain from putting money in the bank for fear that it will affect their case and that they may end up with less money overall. And higher guesses of the asset limit were associated with higher amounts of money saved. So if someone thought they could save more money, they tended to do that. My recommendations are first, to remove the asset limit for TANF in New York. Even though I couldn't prove that relationship that I talked about, that higher savings were caused by confusion about the asset limit, it is possible that removing the asset limit would encourage more people to save money and to be more financially stable in the long run. And if not removing the limit, I also advocate raising the limit from $2,000 to something a little bit higher so that people feel more comfortable saving money. In addition, I recommend increasing the transparency of asset limit regulations. Like I said, the more people know about how much they're allowed to save, the more comfortable they might feel putting money in the bank and saving money for the long term. Additionally, career service providers such as America Works can add all this information to their trainings, because the clearer ideas that people have about how much they can save money will hopefully encourage them to save more, and America Works can add that to the financial literacy training that I've been teaching this year. And next, we'll have my colleague Sabita from our Washington, D.C. office.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to be looking at digital literacy and the impacts it has on employment. I decided to research digital literacy after seeing how many of the clients I was working with were unable to use a computer. In my role at America Works, I managed a small program and would sit down with my clients to help them apply to jobs. While many low-wage jobs do not require digital literacy, job applications are mainly found online. A job seeker is looking to apply as a stocker in a grocery store, as a janitor in a school, as a construction site worker will need to submit an online application. I observed that computer literacy was low among America Works clients. However, many of them had a smartphone and were able to navigate their emails and complete internet searches on their smartphone. So I designed my research to look at digital literacy and the impacts it has on employment searches. My 3 research questions are: what experience do America Works clients have with smartphones and computers? Are America Works clients independently using technology for job searching purposes? Are America Works clients interested in learning new ways to utilize the technology to which they have access for job searching purposes? I hypothesized that America Works clients would be able to use their smartphones better than a computer, however, that they're not using this technology to apply to jobs. I distributed an anonymous survey to 56 respondents in the Baltimore, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. offices from March until May of 2019. I found that 55% of clients had an advanced ability to use a smartphone versus 32% of clients that had an advanced ability to use a computer. More significantly, 86% of clients surveyed owned a smartphone, and only 43% of clients owned a computer. The pie graphs on this slide shows the breakdown of applications clients are submitting over smartphones and computers. 29% of clients completed 45 or more applications on a smartphone, and 36% completed 45 or more applications on a computer. There are 3 things that we can conclude from this data. First, more clients can use a smartphone than a computer, with 55% of clients having an advanced ability and 41% of clients having a basic ability to use a smartphone. Secondly, 86% of clients own a smartphone, meaning that this is a highly accessible form of technology. Lastly, America Works clients are not applying to enough jobs. The Employment Services Agreement, which is an agreement that clients sign when they are brought into an America Works program, states that clients are required to apply to 15 jobs per week, which means if they are with America Works for 3 weeks, they should have already applied to 45 or more applications. Forbes states that an average of 118 applications are submitted for one job posting. Only 20% of those applicants get an interview, and only one person receives the job. This data exemplifies how important it is for job applications to increase. To be competitive in the increasingly digital age, applications need to increase. Employment agencies should stress to clients the importance of submitting many applications and make them more independent in submitting these applications. Which brings me to my second recommendation. Since clients have access and ability to use smartphones, employment agencies should teach clients how to use their smartphones for job applications. While computer literacy is still important, America Works should include classes teaching smartphone literacy in relation to job applications. Shown in the photo next to me is an informational flyer detailing how to effectively apply to jobs on Indeed, an employment-related search engine, over a smartphone. Flyers like these can be given to clients to give a step-by-step instruction on how to apply to jobs using a smartphone. Increasing clients' knowledge on smartphone applications will increase clients' independence in the job search process. I'm going to introduce our next presenter, Alana, who will be looking at the effects of undiagnosed learning disabilities.
Thank you, Tabitha. Like she said, my name is Alana, and I worked in the Brooklyn site this year, and I studied the effects of undiagnosed learning disabilities on academic outcomes and unemployment experiences. So the first question I asked is, who has a disability? 20% of individuals in the United States have a diagnosed learning disability and receive accommodations. That percentage jumps to 80% within adult education programs. It goes to 32% of 16 to 25-year-olds in vocational programs such as America Works. There's a higher percentage of individuals with learning disabilities among impoverished areas. If an individual does not get diagnosed with a disability, they forfeit their right to receive accommodations. Without these accommodations, an individual is 3 times more likely to drop out of high school, which leaves them making $10,000 less a year on average. They're twice as likely to be unemployed as an adult. Shall they decide to go back and get their high school diploma, they need to pass the TASC exam. This exam, in order to get accommodations on, they need a formal diagnosis. However, the diagnosis process is intensive and costs between $500 to $2,000, which this population largely cannot afford. Learning disabilities are also associated with different types of employment. Individuals with a diagnosed learning disability on average take semi-skilled and part-time employment at a higher rate than the general population. In addition, 67% earn $25,000 less a year within the first 8 years of leaving high school. This led me to ask 3 questions. The first is there a relationship between long-term unemployment experiences and the likelihood of having an undiagnosed learning disability? Second, how do unemployment experiences differ between individuals with a formally diagnosed learning disability and the general population? And third, how do unemployment experiences differ between individuals with a formally diagnosed learning disability and individuals that believe that they're living with an undiagnosed learning disability? So I had 3 hypotheses to go along with this. First is that there would be a negative correlation between the likelihood of an undiagnosed learning disability and academic achievements. Second, that there would be a positive correlation between the likelihood an individual has an undiagnosed learning disability and the length of time that they were unemployed over the last 5 years. And third, that those with a learning disability who receive accommodations will be unemployed for a shorter time and less often than individuals with a learning disability that do not receive accommodations. Since I cannot formally diagnose anyone, I had to create a proxy test to measure this. So I distributed 50 anonymous surveys to America Works clients in the Brooklyn site. Of this, the questions consisted of demographic, academic, and unemployment experience questions. Then there was, like I said, a proxy test. This measured the likelihood that an individual is living with an undiagnosed learning disability. In order to create a baseline to establish what a score would look like for individuals who have a disability, I used the data from people who had already been diagnosed. My results found that there was, in fact, a really strong negative correlation between participants' education level and the proxy test score. This meant that individuals with a higher likelihood of having an undiagnosed learning disability were more likely to have a lower educational background. However, there was no significant relationship between the long-term unemployment experiences and the likelihood that an individual has a learning disability, nor was there a significant relationship in the time unemployed between those formally diagnosed with a learning disability and the general population. However, the belief of having a learning disability was actually associated with a shorter amount of time unemployed. This suggests that the belief does not actually deter individuals from applying and seeking employment. So in conclusion, this study really didn't suggest that unemployment experiences differed between general population and those with learning disabilities. However, there is a strong correlation between academic success and disabilities. Since academic success is so highly connected to job opportunity, this led me to believe that while undiagnosed learning disabilities might not affect unemployment experiences, they may have an impact on actual employment experiences. So I decided that instead of coming with a clear conclusion, I would think of where we could go in the future with more studies. It would be interesting to look at the differing incomes and employment sectors that individuals with disabilities are going into. It would also be interesting to measure the unemployment rates among these populations. And finally, to look at intergenerational economic mobility within these populations. And finally, my recommendations are to utilize some of the programs that we already have. First, Bridge program funding is established to allow individuals who are job seekers to take courses such as GED classes to increase their job opportunity. Some of this funding could be utilized to offer free and accessible learning disability testing, since it is already higher prevalence among this population. Next is to have vocational programs such as America Works partner with state organizations such as Access VR, who already offer free learning disability testing, but are oftentimes underutilized due to lack of information and lack of knowledge among the population. And finally, it's important to train teachers in low-income school districts to recognize the signs of learning disabilities from an earlier age so that we can prevent this from occurring in the future. Thank you, and it is my pleasure to introduce Sharon Lamb from our Queens office. She'll be talking to you today about employment patterns among single mothers on public assistance.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to talk about single mothers, employment patterns among single mothers receiving public assistance today. So in 2014, 4 of 10 family households with dependent children had mothers who were either the sole or primary source of income for the family. Now, statistically, single mothers have always faced a lot of employment issues and childcare issues and have been shown to be of lesser education and of lower income. Therefore, something surprising has happened in 2015. In 2015, the proportion of young single mothers entering the workforce has surged by almost 4%. Now, why specifically employment? Because whether a single mother chooses to be employed in the workforce determines whether her family lives within or out of poverty. Nearly 7 in 10 families headed by single mothers who do not work live in poverty. Yet, even for those who do work, 1 in 10 families live in poverty. My research study investigates 3 questions. First, are there any associations between welfare reliance and characteristics of public assistance recipients, such as race, age, or highest level of education completed? Second, are there any specific employment barriers faced by single mothers? Prior literature has shown that childcare and transportation costs were the primary employment barriers. Third, my research study investigates personal control, which has shown to be a mediating factor towards decreased welfare reliance. A survey was created to answer these 3 research questions and distributed in the Queens, Manhattan, and Brooklyn sites. In total, 74 surveys were collected, and to the right shows a table compiling the breakdown of the participants' demographics. To answer the first research question, welfare reliance was measured by something called economic self-sufficiency, which I will now abbreviate as ESS. Now, ESS scores can range from 0 to 1. Having an ESS score of near 1 indicates that the individual is highly dependent on welfare while having an ESS of near zero indicates that the individual is highly independent of public assistance. Now, economic self-sufficiency was not found to be associated with any characteristics, but what was interesting is that most single mothers whose average self-sufficiency score was between 0.8 and 1, so they were highly reliant on public assistance, had children whose average age was between newborn and 10 years old. To answer the second research question, single mothers did not seem to be primarily concerned about childcare costs. In fact, more than half of the single mothers actually agreed that they were more restricted in finding a job because they had to match their work schedule with their childcare center hours. Similarly, single mothers were not primarily concerned about transportation costs. They were more restricted in finding a job whose commute would allow them to pick up their child in time from their childcare center. To answer my third research question, personal control was measured by something called the Perlin Mastery Score, whose scores ranges from 7 to 28. Having a higher number indicates that the individual feels more control over external circumstances that influences his or her life. The mean and median were around 15, which was not too high, but also not too low as well. In conclusion, mothers who are taking care of their children during early development years, so around 0 to 10 years old, were more likely to stay at home for a variety of reasons, willingly or unwillingly. And when their children are 10 years or older, they transition into the workforce with varying levels of success. My second conclusion, concerns regarding childcare and transportation seem to have transitioned from cost to compatibility with hours and distance. Based on my conclusions, I recommend that companies provide on-site daycares. Now, several companies have actually spearheaded this, such as Cliff Bar, and results have been phenomenal. There was less than 5% employee turnover and high marks for service and quality of care. Second, I recommend job training programs to take advantage of their positive working relationships with employers and provide this targeted information so that they have a better understanding that single mothers are often restrained in hours, distance, and ultimately employment choices. Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce my colleague, Ramsey Daniels from the Brooklyn office. He will be discussing post-secondary education for working adults.
Hello, how are you guys doing? Good. Thank you guys for being here and for being so good looking. So I'm going to talk about post-secondary education for working adults. I was inspired to research this topic because I met a lot of clients at the Brooklyn site who had been enrolled in college but weren't able to complete it due to a variety of factors, one of which was work. So, my research showed me that adult undergraduates are actually the fastest growing population of college students, and now they actually account for 44% of the overall college student population. However, despite the fact that there's a lot more adult undergraduates, they're still graduating at the same rate. So clearly something with the college environment is not working for their needs. Vida Marilani from Cornell University shed some insight on this issue. She said that post-secondary schooling as an institution is organized around the assumption that people attend college at ages when school will be their primary activity versus at older ages when family and work responsibilities might compete for students' attention. Those of us who have recently graduated from college can attest to the fact that it was designed with the assumption that we could dedicate all of our time to school, whereas clearly that's not the case for almost half of the college population. I actually kind of have two sides to my research. One was looking at the clients at America Works in Brooklyn, and the other one was picking the brain of some of the employers that we place clients with. In terms of the client side of the survey, I was interested in learning what personal or professional benefits they hope to gain by attending college, as well as what barriers they were anticipating facing when they went back. I was also interested in figuring out if they would be more likely to stay at a job for a longer period of time if that job were to offer them assistance with college. Since one of America Works' goals is to get clients employed for as long as possible, this would be a great connection if this were the case. On the employer side, I was interested in learning what value employers see in their employees going on to get degrees. I was also interested in learning what might encourage some employers to offer either financial or academic assistance to their employees. And then for the employers who are currently offering that assistance, what form does it take? My hypothesis was that clients would be more likely to remain with an employer if they offered them financial support for college, and that employers would cite reduced turnover as the most appealing factor for providing support. I used 2 anonymous surveys, one which was distributed to 40 clients at the Brooklyn office of America Works, the second which was distributed to 18 employers that we place clients with at America Works. So these are some of the results from the client survey. 100%, right? It doesn't get higher than that. 100% of clients said that they would be more likely to remain at a job if they were to offer them assistance, right? And that was for financial assistance. For academic tutoring, it was almost unanimous as well. On the employer side, I asked if their company offered any assistance to employees enrolled in higher education. Approximately 44% of employers currently offer this, which is great, but it's still less than half. For those who answered no, I asked them which of the following would make them more likely to offer that assistance. And the most appealing answers were increased employee knowledge, increased employee morale, and a mutually beneficial partnership with a specific college. So, big takeaways. Clients would be more likely to stay at a job longer if the job were to offer them academic or financial support for college. Employers believe that the strongest incentive for providing assistance would be to increase the morale and knowledge of their employees. And currently, less than half of the employers we surveyed offer any type of assistance with post-secondary education. So where do we go from there? One thing that I would suggest is outreach to employers. 88.9% of employers indicated that they believe they believe their employees who are enrolled in college are doing a better job, basically. However, only 44% of them were providing any assistance. So in order to close that gap, I think it would be useful to educate employers about the potential benefits of helping their employees attend college. I would also recommend creating an education-friendly employer list. This could be helpful when clients approach job developers wanting to get a job but also being very focused on completing a college degree. We could refer them to this list and say these are some workplaces that might fit your needs. Last but not least, it's necessary to do more research about college assistance programs. The biggest ones in the country right now are Starbucks and Walmart, which both offer almost complete tuition reimbursement, but they are less than 5 years old. So as time goes on, we'll be able to do more research about how these programs may have changed the career trajectories of their employees. So that is all from me, and now I would like to introduce David Hamburger, who will be talking about high school degree requirements.
Hi everyone. Like many of the colleagues who have spoken before me, my research started with my experience working with our clients in the Brooklyn office. One client in particular. I gotta adjust this because Ramsey's got like 8 inches on me. There we go. Cool. So this is Tony, one of our favorite clients in the Brooklyn office, and me with a winter beard that I'm glad I got rid of. And just a little backstory of Tony's life before she came to America Works. Tony became pregnant as a junior in high school and dropped out of high school, pursued work opportunities. She had a part-time job working at a large investment bank in New York. Was so excellent that they couldn't let her go and actually promoted her not once but 4 times over a 13-year career, in which she maxed out at a $60,000 salary with a 401k. And this was really important as a single mom of 4. She was able to support her whole family and was really in a good place. Unfortunately, in 2007, Tony lost her job, like so many Americans during the Great Recession, and was out of work. And Tony's story from that point on has been a little bit rough. Has been working part-time, finding part-time jobs, and by the time she reached us in America Works, the job that she was off doing was doing custodial work at the Barclays Center. Overnight, she actually was injured at her job. She was missing seeing her incredible two daughters who are state champion runners, missing those races. And it kind of just didn't sit well with me. Here's this incredibly intelligent, personable individual, and I was like, well, what's going on? Like, how is she not able to get back in the workplace? And what she kept on telling me was, well, listen, I don't have a high school diploma, and I can't find a job as an administrative assistant, as an office manager that will take me. They all have these requirements. So I said, okay, well, I want to look into this, because it wasn't just Tony. I heard stories like this throughout the year at America Works. And when you look at it, in 1973, 32% of U.S. jobs were open to people that did not have a high school diploma. This number, projections show, in 2020 will be about 12%. And there's a lot of reasons for this. We've moved a lot of our manufacturing overseas. We're a service-based economy, certainly a lot of factors. And then this process is known as up-credentialing. And it's very well studied and documented with a parallel issue, college diplomas and college degrees, the increased amount of education requirements of job descriptions, advertising, administrative assistant positions require a college degree, which means 81% of current administrative assistants, if they lost their job, could not apply to 2/3 of the administrative assistant jobs. Right, so there's been this big increase in the requirements, education requirements associated with jobs with college degrees, and it's been well studied and there's some fantastic studies. Fuller and Manjari and Burning Glass Technologies have kind of really looked at, like, what do employers think they're getting with a college degree recipient they wouldn't be getting with someone that has, say, a high school degree or an associate bachelor's. But I kept looking, I couldn't find anything that was looking at up-credentialing and what employers thought they were getting when they had someone who had a high school diploma versus someone like Tony who had maybe work experience but no high school diploma. So what I really did was I took the Fuller and Manjari study and the questions that they were asking, and I kind of applied it to the issue of high school diplomas. And my two questions were, what do employers, as I said, think a high school degree tells them about a potential applicant? Why is it important to them? And is the insistence of requiring these high school diplomas, is it actually working against the employer, right? You put a job requirement on a job in order to attract the right pool of candidates, but maybe this was doing something actually quite the opposite, blocking off potentially wonderful candidates like Tony from a job that she clearly was qualified for, right? Had done it with honors for 13 years. And my hypothesis was yes, that I kind of imagine that employers who maybe hadn't been in high school in a while or hadn't kind of seen what a New York high school looks like were kind of putting value on it that maybe just wasn't justified. So I interviewed America Works clients, Tony being one of them, and I gave surveys to employers that we work with at America Works. So if we look at this first graph, I asked a very simple question. Again, this is from the Manjari study. I asked, what attributes are most important to you and potential applicants? And I gave them 10 options. I asked them to rank them, 1 being the most important and 10 being the least important. And if we go from left to right, this graph shows what employers value the most. So the thing they value the most is applicable work experience, right? Kind of makes sense. If you're an employer, you want someone that you know can hack it at your job. The second was communication skills, certifications, computer skills, and a track record of working on a team. Now, what's interesting here is if we look, the most sought after skill is applicable work experience. So this does not have anything to do with high school or a high school experience. Certifications such as having a food protection license, which allows you to work in restaurants, or OSHA certification, which allows you to work in construction. None of these actually require a high school diploma to get. So those are two of the most important. Those, again, you could have without having a high school degree. And then the other skills, communication skills, computer skills, track record of working in a team, like we all hope that our high schools teach that, but it's a soft skill, right? You don't have to have these skills to pass your regents, to graduate high school, or to pass your task exam to get a high school equivalency degree. Those are not tested specifically. Now, if we look all the way at the other end, the skills that maybe they were not as important to employers, knowledge of U.S. history, math skills, writing skills, these are actually not as valued as much, but these are actually what you need to have in order to pass high school or to get your high school equivalency degree, which is interesting. Then another question I asked, and this I thought was really cool as well, was I said to these employers, I said, okay, compared to individuals who have work experience but no high school diploma, so that's the Tonys of the world, compare that group to applicants who are recent high school graduates. And basically, what do you think the difference of these two pools of candidates would be? And just starting from left to right, employers said, well, if someone graduated high school, even if they're a recent high school graduate, they're gonna have a higher salary expectation. So this, I put a little minus over here because if you're an employer, trying to keep costs low. So this is actually something that maybe you wouldn't want. And then if we look in the middle, the majority of respondents, I gave them 4 options. I said, do you think, the group of people with diplomas, or the group of people with work experience but no diploma, or do you think they'll be equal, or do you think you don't know, right? So with respect to the amount of time required for initial training, productivity, the likelihood to miss work, and how much supervisor oversight was needed, they said that actually these two groups would be equal. They didn't think there'd be a difference between someone who had a high school diploma versus someone who had work experience but no diploma. And then we go all the way to the end, and these were the 3 things that they thought separated someone who had a high school diploma. They thought that they would be better at learning new things, more open and gung-ho for optional training and professional development, and have better computer skills. And I think further study needs to go into whether or not this is actually true, but just in my own experience, right? Working with Ramsey and Alana, we taught a class that helped folks who didn't have a high school diploma get ready to take the test. And as I think back to folks like Tony and thinking, about the clients that we had who conquered things like learning about atomic bonding and learning about complex algebra, and learning with Ramsey how to use a semicolon, which my parents who are here and have looked at many college essays can say that I certainly may not have, right? Are these things really skills and attributes that someone without a high school diploma doesn't have? Because obviously it's going into the perception, which is going into the job requirements. So my conclusions, a few of them. Employers may have a misguided view of what skills and qualities a high school degree ensures a candidate possessing, right? So, does someone who graduated high school necessarily have good computer skills? And in kind of the fill-in sections, a lot of them are saying they expected high school graduates to have advanced Excel skills and PowerPoint skills. And while I hope we're producing high school graduates to have them, it's maybe a stretch to think that that's something that you're guaranteed to have with a high school degree. The attributes employers value most are not necessarily tied to high school degrees, right? Again, communication skills, interpersonal skills, these soft skills, I don't know the likelihood of having them from graduating high school versus having a lot of real world experience, whether employment or otherwise. And the idea, the last thing is that employers are losing eligible candidates by requiring high school degrees, right? So if you're trying to hire, you're making it harder on yourself in some respect by putting this extra stipulation. A few quick recommendations. Employers should re-examine their high school degree requirements for particular jobs. We've seen organizations like Google and Facebook in recent years say, wait a second, we're actually not going to require college degrees because, especially for programming, we want people with computer skills. But computer skills can be achieved not through college, right? So for certain jobs, you have to wonder, do you need a high school degree to be an administrative assistant? Tony did it with honors, again, for 13 years. Another recommendation, employers should consider alternative assessments to investigate an applicant's skill set. If you want to investigate whether an applicant has computer skills, why not give them a test, testing their computer skills instead of this in-between of requiring a high school diploma. And finally, pre-employment and in-house training programs. These are becoming more popular recently. CVS has a large program where they actually don't put requirements on having their staff have college degrees because they have an extensive year-long training program. There's an intensive part at the beginning, but it's really a year-long training program that makes sure that applicants and new hires are really ready to be a great member of their team.
As mentioned, I will be talking about automation and AI and the future of work and how prevalent that is, and having a discussion about that with welfare recipients at AmericaWorks. So this project was largely inspired with an initial conversation I had with the founder of AmericaWorks, Mr. Peter Cove. I was fortunate to be introduced to one of his colleagues, Mr. Dan Wellers, where I was really inspired to talk about automation. And one of the quotes he told me early on in this fellowship year is, how do we as a company who has had an enormous amount of success in placing individuals into jobs for 30-some years understand technology and its changes to best assist and place our clients who may not have a job in the future? A little introduction about automation and AI and its current threat to the modern day workplace is that automation and advanced technologies are estimated to replace 47% of all American jobs by 2030, according to a Frey and Osborne study. In addition to those jobs that are being replaced, additional complications include an automation-induced inequality, which is a precipitous effect that inequality, both socially, economically, a whole host of factors will increase with automation and AI. Of those groups, low-educated Hispanic and Black women are of the most vulnerable populations. Unfortunately, current research is limited in its scope as studies fail to address how job seekers, particularly those who are most vulnerable, view and perceive automation, posing great challenges to providers like AmericaWorks, who aim to refer individuals to long-term and self-sufficient employment. As a result, I developed 3 research questions, the first of which is, how do AmericaWorks clients view automation in work? The second, what jobs are at the highest risk of automation and what clients are being referred into such? And lastly, does a client's demographic susceptibility predict a greater likelihood of both preference and placement into jobs at risk of automation? From these research questions, I developed 3 hypotheses, the first of which is a majority of AmericaWorks clientele surveyed will have low awareness of automation and its job prospects. The second, AmericaWorks job placements into the 6 jobs mentioned on the survey that I conducted will yield a majority of all job placements. And lastly, demographic vulnerability will be predictive of both preferences and placement of those into jobs with high automation potential. My methodology, as I mentioned, included a survey with 38 respondents from AmericaWorks of New York Manhattan Career Advance program, job placement data through our Salesforce database, highlighting jobs asked about in the initial survey and the placement and demographic makeup of those placed into such jobs. And lastly, to analyze these data sources, custom variable creation, descriptive statistics, and 2 regression models. In regards to my first hypothesis that over half of survey respondents would have low awareness of automation and the threat it poses to the future of work, over half of the surveys I received back, the clients had low awareness about automation. Furthermore, that idea of low awareness was stratified even more in that people that had low awareness, the majority in that group were concentrated at even higher percentiles of low awareness. My second hypothesis and the results I got from it were that AmericaWorks has placed 2,236 HRA assigned individuals into work from June 18th, which was the first day of our fellowship, through May 29th, 2019. Unfortunately, of those placements, 778, or over a third of those jobs, were into the 6 jobs mentioned in the survey. Those jobs include dishwasher, security guard, receptionist, cashier, counter attendant, and a data entry clerk. All of these positions have greater than a 75% chance of being automated by 2030, according to the initial study. Additional placements demonstrated that individuals being placed most often into such jobs were also of the most demographically susceptible variables. In regards to my last hypothesis that wanted to predict the effects of a person's demographic susceptibility in terms of their preference or actual placement into a job, the 2 regression models were implemented. The first test, testing the linear effects of demographic susceptibility on job preference among all survey respondents, indicated more positive results in terms of what we're currently doing at America Works. Low sample size may have restricted the results of this regression. However, one statistically significant finding found that people that were more demographically susceptible were less likely to take jobs as receptionists. On the converse side of things, in a probit model regression, the maximum likelihood of the same demographically susceptible groups ultimately predicted placement in highly automatable jobs. And when I speak of highly automatable jobs, I refer to any job with greater than 90% chance of being automated by 2030. The estimated effects of this model demonstrate that the demographic susceptibility of our clients is a statistically significant predictor with over 99% likelihood that they will be placed into a highly automatable job. Given such, I draw the following conclusions. Low awareness on automation holding demographics constant among AmericaWorks clients was not surprising, but an important conversation starter. While not a majority of job placements across all AmericaWorks sites demonstrate high risk today, the 6 jobs that have a probability of being displaced and automated should signal the alarm I talked about in my title. A specific highly susceptible demographic profile of low-educated Hispanic Black females are being placed into highly automatable jobs, and it is predictable, and that relationship is highly significant. Lastly, future research needs to explore automation probabilities and impact across all job placements in AmericaWorks sites and all programs. And finally, the 3 recommendations I suggest are as follows. Begin having conversations with our clients about automation today. Planning at the provider and policy level, whether it's curriculum, job placement techniques, and so on, are very needed and very important to ensure that clients and the future of companies like AmericaWorks are able to prosper. Second, invest more into already demographically vulnerable groups, particularly females. The quote, "the future is female," is very real in this situation. We don't want to underinvest in people that have already been discriminated historically and are going to be and are being discriminated against in their job placements today. Lastly, we should reward creativity among those who look and search for employment that fits a different classification of those highly automatable jobs, as well as reward our sales reps, job developers, and other parties at AmericaWorks that helps place these people into jobs that are less susceptible to automation. This concludes the Fellows presentation, the 2018-2019 fellowship presentations. The Fellows have gotten both Dee Dee and Emily 2 cards. I don't know.
Hi everyone, I'm Doreen Cove. I am the Executive Director of the Work First Foundation. I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to give the fellows another round of applause. So they did a great job. I was really impressed. I also want to take this opportunity to just quickly thank Patrick Smith, who is one of our fellows, for all of his hard work with the fellowship program, but particularly preparing for this event. He really jumped in and helped us out a lot at the last minute. So thank you, Patrick. And I want to thank my colleague, Emily Jones, who has led the fellows from the beginning. She has been incredible in her leadership this year. So thank you, Emily. So I am here with one of the Work First Foundation board members, Kathy Moan. She is our treasurer, and she is going to be handing out the fellows the awards that they get for their research. So I'm gonna ask the fellows to all stand up. And then Courtney, you're gonna walk towards Patrick and you're all gonna follow her. We're gonna go across the stage and I'm gonna call your names. And Kathy is going to walk over there and hand them their awards as they come up to get them. Please take your seats after, fellows. So first we have Patrick Smith.
And we have Courtney Thomas. We have Ben Harker. Matt Cropper. Anjali Menon. We have Anne Mahoney. Sarah Angel. Tabitha Krondorfer. Alana Fitzpatrick. Sharon Lamb. Ramsey Daniels. And last but not least, David Sunshine Hamburger. Now, Dr. Bose is going to just say a couple words, and then we're all going to have some snacks.
Very quickly, I just want to say that this is probably the most astounding group of fellows we've had so far. I think you could tell by their succinct presentations of their research, it's an amazing group. And I have to thank Sarah and Patrick and Alana. Next year's group is even more amazing. It's been a blessing to have them. What a wonderful group of people. And to have their parents, so many of them here, is also just wonderful. And we also want to thank our partners with HRA and our many government agencies that work with us. This has been a wonderful opportunity, and I think you can see how valuable it has been. So please enjoy the wine, because we have it until 5 o'clock. So get out there, have a glass of wine, and we can ask the fellows all about their fantastic research. I have lots of questions myself, hearing it for the first time. So thank you all, and enjoy.